Okay, folks, this is a quick review of the Youngstown quiz. Which of the following best describes the executive's constitutional role in lawmaking? In lawmaking, right, we know that the legislative branch makes law, and the executive is charged with faithfully executing the laws of the United States. B. They don't tell Congress what law. I mean, they can, but that's not its constitutional role. It's true that the executive appoints officials whose legal judgment he or she trusts, but that's not its constitutional role. Um, and its constitutional function is to execute the laws that the legislative body makes. Number two, which branch of the U.S. government is authorized to make laws? Well, we just answered that. That's C, the legislative branch. There is no undersecretary for law, and the judges don't make laws. Judges interpret laws. Question three, why is this legal issue important? It's true that the U.S. needed steel to make bombs, but that's not the legal issue. It's true that the economy of Youngstown depended on their steel mills, but that's not the legal issue. It was important because it attempted to resolve a balance of powers issue within the legislative body and the executive body. These bodies are always in conflict. They're in conflict on a daily basis. And it's that conflict and the discussion about that conflict that needs to be resolved, and that's part of what Youngstown was doing. What does Youngstown tell us about the balance of powers in the United States? Well, it tells us that what Youngstown stood for is the proposition that basically when you have three branches of government, when two of them say one thing and the third disagrees, usually the two win. So in Youngstown, you had the executive saying that he had the constitutional power to seize the steel mills, and Congress saying, we didn't give you that constitutional power exactly. We don't think you have it. And the court saying, well, Congress, when you give the executive power, or when the executive has power as based in the Constitution, the executive can act. When you expressly tell the executive that they don't have the power, then the executive can't act. But when you leave the matter vague, when you leave it open, then the executive operates in what's called the Zone of Twilight and decides what he or she can and can't do. This happens sometimes. For example, in the Iraq War, the legislative branch has the power to declare war. And in Iraq, what happened was the legislative gave the executive kind of a blank check. It's called the AUMF. It was the Authorization to Use Military Force. And Congress gave that authorization to the executive, and that authorized the Iraq War. But it then kind of went on for like 20 years. It hasn't been repealed. And it's kind of a blank check for the executive to do all kinds of things and say, well, look, Congress gave me this power. Even though Congress might say, well, we didn't mean that much power. The problem is that if Congress wants to change it, Congress has to affirmatively do something to change it. And oftentimes Congress can't get its act together to agree to change things. Question number five. Which two of the following are members of the executive branch? Well, the president is, but the chief justice is a member of the judiciary. Bernie Sanders and Mitch McConnell, those are senators. That's part of the legislative branch. One general and one admiral are part of the military. It's the vice president and his or her chief of staff. Those are members of the executive branch. You can note that because the president has tried to assert executive privilege over communications with the vice president and his or her chief of staff. And that only exists within the executive branch. What state is the Youngstown of Youngstown steel seizure? Ohio. What was a legal issue that the Supreme Court was being asked to decide? The legal issue was whether the executive branch had the constitutional authority to nationalize steel mills. That's basic. That's the basic legal issue. Does he have the constitutional authority? It's not about Wisconsin. It's not about Canada. It's not about North Korea. 1952 was the year of the Youngstown steel seizure case. That's important because it was because there was the Korean War going on, and that's what they wanted the steel for. Question number 9. Write a short response to the quote. Yeah, so on this quote, what I was going for is I want you guys to think about what politics means. I mean, there's a lot of I'm like a political hobbyist. There are political hobbyists, people who write op-eds, people who go on talk shows, people who maybe go to protests, and that's all good and that's all important. But real politics is you identify something that you want to change, whether it's in government, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your school, whether it's in your town, and you say, what do I need to do to make this change? I need to accumulate certain kinds of power. And so you set about getting that power. For example, for many years, the Republicans in the Senate wanted to change the ideological makeup of the Supreme Court. They wanted a more conservative Supreme Court. So to do that, they needed a lot of things. They needed to get kind of a JV or a feeder system of reliably conservative judges. There was a feeling that many judges coming out of Harvard and Yale and elsewhere were liberals or were kind of or might lean liberal, and the conservative movement created something called the Federalist Society, which is a society of conservative judges, and they create kind of lists of judges who they think are really reliably conservative and are ready for appointment. Then the Senate Republicans had to figure out a way to get by the filibuster. The filibuster typically meant that you had to get 60 votes to appoint a Supreme Court justice. Senator Mitch McConnell, who is the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, went about getting this filibuster taken down for Supreme Court justices by first kind of goading the Democrats into removing the filibuster for lower court nominees. This is when President Obama was president. Mitch McConnell used the filibuster to block hundreds of Obama nominees for the lower courts. And finally, the Senate Democrats said, you know what, enough of this. We are going to remove the filibuster for lower court nominees. McConnell said, you shouldn't do that, because if you do that, we are going to turn it around when we're in power. But the Democrats figured, well, we have to do it while we have a chance. So the Democrats got rid of the filibuster for lower court nominees. Then, when McConnell was the leader of the Senate and President Trump was elected, or was appointed president, became president, McConnell got rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees, and immediately put in Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and then late in the game he put in Justice Barrett. All those picks would likely have been filibustered if the filibuster was in place. With Justice Gorsuch, that spot was only open because Senator McConnell and the Senate Republicans refused to even meet with President Obama's nominee to replace Antonin Scalia, who died 10 months before President Obama was going to leave office. So the Republicans had to get a lot of kinds of power, and then they had to wait for their chance. And when their chance came up, they had the power and they made the change, and now there's a 6-3 majority of conservative justices on the Supreme Court. And that's why we're seeing cases like Dobbs' case from Mississippi, cases like the vaccine mandate case, cases like the case challenging affirmative action in college admissions, cases like all kinds of cases that you might not have seen if the makeup of the court was not what it is now. So it's really important to think about what real political work is. It's not just kind of protesting, it can be, but it is identifying what you want to change, mapping out what you need to change it, and then getting the power to change it so that when the chance comes along, you're ready. Question 10, Youngstown concerning legal issue. Yeah, we kind of went over this, but the issue there was that not only do these branches have different powers, but they have different structures, right? That's obvious. The executive has a different structure than the judiciary, right? The executive can act of their own volition. The Supreme Court typically needs a case brought to it. The Supreme Court doesn't act of its own volition. The legislative branch can act of its own volition, but it's a big, unwieldy, multi-person group that has a hard time agreeing sometimes. So there are times when the real world, when the demands of the real world for action, whether it's to defend the country, whether it's to combat a pandemic, whether it's to get steel for bombs, when those real world necessities dictate certain behavior by the branches, and they're all in conversation with each other all the time. So the executive says, I got to do something, and does it. And then the legislature says, wait a second, you can't do that. And the executive says, yes, I can, and moreover, I did, and what are you going to do about it? And the legislature says, we're going to sue you. And then they sue the executive, or they have a conversation, and those powers then go to the Supreme Court. Now, why doesn't this happen all the time? I would submit to you it does happen all the time, but why isn't it not kind of like an ongoing fight that's in the public eye and everything like that. And I'd submit to you that the reason it's not in the public eye all the time is because none of these three branches want a real clear definitive limit on their power. None of them wants the other two to say, you can and can't do these 50 things. They all kind of want to act in this zone of twilight. They all want to act in ways that they don't have the other two saying, all right, that's it, that's enough, because they're supposed to be co-equal. And so they have these kind of conversations about what can and can't I do, and if I do this and then it's wrong, if I change it, is that okay? And we can pass this law and you can veto it. We can overcome that veto, but you might change it, and then we might change it. And it's this kind of like it's not a game of chicken exactly, but it's more like the three branches are very careful about letting the other two make definitive statements about what their powers are. They have to act in the real world. They understand that they have to be in conversation to act in the real world, but they don't want those conversations to result in some serious limits on their power. So in the Youngstown case, this was a case where the real world said, we need steel for bombs, we need steel for weapons, and the executive said, I'm taking the steel. And then over a period of really years, then the branches kind of battle around to figure out what they can and can't do. But the real world kind of requires oftentimes that the branches overextend and then pull back. All right, that's it. Good job. Thanks.